When I was in 5th grade, I think I was like 12 years old, I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I saved up my money, and I bought a Canon T3i, which is the exact same camera that most of us started on. And when I think back to this period in my filmmaking career, the very beginning, it's kind of like the good old days. I wanted to go out and shoot nonstop, every single day, all the time. All day at school, all I could think about was coming home, grabbing my camera, and making movies with my friends. A few years later, I sold all of my Canon gear, and I moved to a Sony A6500 because it had 4K. And I felt unstoppable with this thing. Now I have internal IBIS, 4K, S-Log, great low light. I had everything I could ever want. I shot a lot of my first professional films on this camera, and I remember using that good old Sigma 30mm 1.4 contemporary all the time. But pretty soon that wasn't enough, so I switched to a Sony A7 III, which is still an excellent camera. Now I don't have to worry about overheating, and the screen doesn't dim, and now I have a full frame camera finally. Now I was unstoppable. I also have a lot of memories with this camera. This is when I stepped into wedding filmmaking, and I shot dozens and dozens and dozens of weddings on this thing. I think the A7 III is the camera I kept for the longest amount of time besides the T3i. It's just such a workhorse. But one day I was on YouTube, and I was probably listening to somebody say that the A7 III's image is bad, and Sony's IBIS is bad, and 8-bit images are bad. And I felt like I needed to round out my setup. So I bought a GH5, which shoots 10-bit 422 images. Now I had the perfect setup. Now I have super high quality 4K with IBIS with the GH5, crazy low light and autofocus with the A7 III. This was a new season for me, and I started working in video full time. But the more I shot with my perfect setup, the more I resented the GH5's weird color science and the A7 III's blotchy log footage, and I decided that I needed something better. Something that would make people take me seriously. I needed a cinema camera. Even with all my cages and rigging and V-mounts, I knew a real cinema camera was what I needed. So I sold both of my cameras, and I bought an old beat-up second-hand Ursa Mini Pro 4.6K. Rolling up to wedding shoots with that thing was truly awesome. I would turn heads with this huge metal cinema camera, and I loved that thing. The image was spectacular, almost perfect, really. It did have one huge issue, though, and that's that it wasn't very mobile. I missed the days when I could put my tiny mirrorless camera in tight spaces or in a backpack, and I decided that I needed a second body that would shoot great video and would be lightweight and mobile. So here comes Fujifilm. I bought the X-T3 and was absolutely blown away by that thing. It actually cut pretty well with my Ursa, and I loved the look of it, but it did have one huge issue. Right after it was announced, or at least right after I bought it, the X-T4 came out. I immediately sold my X-T3 and pre-ordered the X-T4, and wow, that camera blew me away, man. It's so good. It dusted the X-T3 with its new battery and flip screen and IBIS. Now I had the perfect setup. Except then I got married and moved into an 800 square foot house, and I sold most of my filmmaking gear to downsize. I sold both of my cameras, and I bought the king of all cameras, the infamous and long-awaited Sony A7S III. It felt so good coming back to Sony, almost like coming home. That camera is an absolute feat of engineering, almost perfect in every way. Except then the FX3 came out. The exact same thing, except even better, and it even says Cinema Line on it. I needed it. I traded my Sony in for the Sony, and now I was set. I knew I had a compact camera that could shoot beautiful video, and I was off to the races. But then I started to get sick of all the rigging and the extra batteries and the ND filters and the monitors I had to keep track of. I wanted something really simple that I didn't have to think about, and I also kind of wanted to downgrade to something a little bit more affordable. $4,000 is a lot of money for a single camera body, although honestly it is totally worth it. So I researched, I made a list of my options and my price range, which is, I don't know, about $2,500 for bodies. And I narrowed it down to one camera that seemed perfect for me feature-wise. It checked all of the boxes. And that's a used Canon C200, which I decided was absolutely not an option. This is the decision I want to talk about because I think it's interesting. With every camera purchase I've made, I've become more and more entangled in a, let's call it, brand bias. Even though I was always telling myself I wasn't, and I would say I'll go and shoot with anything, when I first started, I didn't care what camera I had. As long as I was able to shoot movies, I was happy. As soon as I upgraded from the Sony A6500 from the T3i, I started to form a bias. The A6500 was so much more capable. I began to notice that Canon cameras in general, at least back then, were overpriced and under-equipped. Sony cameras seemed to punch above their weight in features, and I noticed the same thing with the GH5, and I started to pay attention to Panasonic. Throughout my career, my opinion of brands has sort of ebbed and flowed, always changing. And once I became aware of Sony's 8-bit blotchy footage and Panasonic's weird color, I moved away from those brands, and my opinion dropped. I noticed how awesome Blackmagic is, and my preference shifted there, and so on. One of the worst decisions I've ever made was also completely necessary and inevitable, and that was to upgrade from my first camera. When I started noticing more expensive and more capable camera bodies that could do things that my T3i couldn't, I became a different filmmaker. My innocence died a little, I guess. I became less concerned with my films and more concerned with how my films looked and how I looked shooting my films. At times I would even say I wasn't a filmmaker. I became a camera enthusiast. I wasn't a creator, just a consumer. I followed what cameras my role models were using. I followed advice. And all the while I wasn't really becoming a better filmmaker. You're probably clenched up right now, ready for me to drop the gear doesn't matter bomb, but I actually don't think that's true. Gear matters a lot. A huge portion of professional video work is gated by specific codecs and resolutions and looks, and if you want to paint beautiful images, sometimes you need excellent brushes. But every once in a while you don't. I don't want to discourage camera purchases. I actually still think they're really exciting and fun, but I would like to pass on a question you should ask yourself. Am I a filmmaker or a consumer right now? I had no experience when I got my T3i, and I knew basically nothing. And in a weird way, I was sort of at my prime. Creatively, I was firing on all cylinders. And so the question becomes, can I get back to that spot? Yeah, I think so, but I don't know if I'm there yet. I'm trying. I always hit an internal block that says my gear isn't good enough for that project. I can't do that. I would need something better for that. And rarely this is actually the case. This year I'm going to try and work on that. I want to go from I can't do that with my current setup to I need to figure out how to pull this off. All of my different camera switches aren't the problem, I don't think. It's the reason why I was switching, that is. The excitement of every new camera and the slow fade into wanting a new camera instead of the implementing of new tools into new projects. But what about brand bias? Which brands offer the best value? Which is the smartest to invest in? I still have some opinions, but I've learned at the end of the day it doesn't really matter that much. We all act like our favorite brand is the best and all other brands are terrible. When I think back through every camera that I've owned, they were all excellent and super capable. I've owned every single brand except some of the more obscure video brands and Nikon, but even Nikon is releasing killer cameras right now. Every single brand is making insanely good stuff right now. Sony's killing it, Blackmagic's killing it, Fujifilm is killing it, Canon is killing it, Panasonic is killing it. Everybody's making great stuff. My advice would be to seek counsel, get some gear, and just use it. Don't be a turkey and go online and trash someone else's camera because you think their brand sucks. That's a turkey thing to do. Don't be a turkey. Collaborate with others and try to learn new things. It's okay to switch camera systems, even often. Just don't let it become all you worry about. Pour all of your energy into filmmaking. Ever since leaving the T3i, I've drifted farther and farther away from Team Canon. And to be fair, their cameras can be overpriced and restrictive. But that doesn't mean they don't make excellent tools. So why can't I downgrade from an FX3 to a C200? Because I don't like Canon cameras. But I don't know if that's true. I just didn't want to cave and go over to the dark side after giving Canon such a hard time for so many years. My pride was wrapped up in what tools I was using, which is incredibly restrictive and stupid. My second piece of advice is to use what tool is best for you, not the tool your pride prefers. My pride preferred anything but Canon, and the consumer in me wanted the latest and greatest and most expensive camera body. But what is the best tool for me as a filmmaker right now? That's the important question, but here's a better one. What can I go out and shoot today?